War has a sound. Sometimes it is the thunder of artillery. Sometimes it is the roar of engines in the sky. But on June 22, 1941, war began in silence. For nearly 2 years, the world believed the impossible had happened. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, bitter ideological enemies, had signed a pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Publicly, it promised peace. Secretly, it divided Eastern Europe into pieces. Poland would be carved apart, the Baltic states swallowed, borders redrawn in ink before blood. Stalin believed the agreement bought him time. Time to rebuild his army. Time to industrialize. Time to prepare for the war he knew would eventually come. But Hitler never believed in the pact. To him, it was temporary. A convenience. His true objective lay to the east. Lebensraum, living space. The destruction of Soviet communism. The conquest of land. The annihilation of what he called an inferior enemy. For months, warning signs appeared. British intelligence reported troop movements. Soviet spies warned Moscow. German divisions quietly repositioned along the border. More than 3 million soldiers. Thousands of tanks. Thousands of aircraft. The largest invasion force ever assembled in human history. And yet, Stalin refused to believe it. He convinced himself it was British misinformation. He forbade his commanders from provoking Germany. He ordered silence, no mobilization, no defensive preparation that might provoke Berlin. Then came the early hours of June 22. At 3:15 in the morning, the sky exploded. German artillery opened fire across an 1,800-mile front, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Shells rained down on Soviet positions. Airfields were bombed before planes could take off. Entire divisions were caught asleep. Operation Barbarossa had begun. Operation Barbarossa. Within hours, the Luftwaffe destroyed thousands of Soviet aircraft, many still parked wing to wing on runways. Communication lines collapsed. Command structures shattered. Confusion spread like wildfire. Soviet soldiers woke to chaos. Explosions. Smoke. Screams. Some thought it was a training exercise. Others believed it must be a mistake. Germany would not dare. Germany could not dare. But this was no mistake. This was betrayal on a continental scale. In Berlin, Hitler declared the invasion a preemptive defense. In reality, it was ideological war, a war of extermination. A war unlike anything Europe had seen before. In Moscow, Stalin was paralyzed. When reports flooded in confirming the invasion, he refused at first to respond. For hours, he said nothing. For days, he disappeared from public view. The Soviet Union, one of the largest nations on Earth, had been caught unprepared. And the German war machine advanced with terrifying speed. Panzer divisions sliced through border defenses. Infantry followed in relentless waves. Encirclements began forming almost immediately. Entire Soviet armies would soon be trapped. What had started as a pact of convenience had become the beginning of the most brutal front of the Second World War. This was not just an invasion. It was the opening of a war that would consume cities, starve millions, freeze armies in snow, and reshape the fate of Europe. On June 20, 1941, the eastern horizon burned, and the world changed forever. In the next chapter, the full scale of the invasion would reveal itself, and the sky over the Soviet Union would turn black. At dawn, the horizon was on fire. What began with artillery did not stop there. It escalated. It multiplied. It consumed everything in its path. The German assault was not a simple invasion. It was Blitzkrieg on a continental scale. 3 massive army groups surged forward simultaneously. Army Group North toward Leningrad, Army Group Center toward Moscow, Army Group South toward Ukraine. Thousands of tanks rolled across open fields. Columns of armored vehicles stretched for miles. Infantry advanced behind mechanized thunder. And above them, the sky turned black. The Luftwaffe dominated the air within hours. Soviet aircraft, caught unprepared, were destroyed in staggering numbers. Many never left the ground. Airfields burned. Hangars exploded. Pilots died inside their cockpits. In the first days alone, thousands of Soviet planes were eliminated. The Red Air Force was shattered before it could fight back. On the ground, confusion ruled. Soviet commanders received fragmented reports. Communication lines were severed. Orders contradicted each other. Some units were told to hold position. Others were told to counterattack. Many received no orders at all. German panzer divisions exploited every weakness. They did not aim for cities first. They aimed for encirclement. They cut deep behind Soviet lines, then closed the trap. Entire armies found themselves surrounded, cut off, isolated. At Białystok, at Minsk, vast pockets formed. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were trapped. Food ran out. Ammunition dwindled. Hope faded. Some fought until their last bullet. Others attempted desperate breakouts through forests and marshlands. Many were captured. In just weeks, the scale of destruction became unimaginable. The front did not move in miles. It moved in hundreds of miles. German forces advanced so quickly that maps became outdated within days. Villages fell in hours. Cities in days. And yet, this was not simply a military campaign. Behind the advancing Wehrmacht followed another force. Mobile killing units. Tasked not with defeating armies, but with eliminating people. Political officers. Intellectuals, Jewish communities. The invasion was ideological. It was racial. It was merciless. In Ukraine and the Baltic states, mass executions began almost immediately. Fields became graves. Forests became silent witnesses. The war in the East would not follow the rules of the West. There would be no restraint, no mercy. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Stalin finally addressed the nation. His voice, steady but heavy, called the invasion what it was: a war for survival. Factories were ordered to evacuate eastward. Entire industries dismantled and placed onto trains. Civilians were mobilized. The Soviet Union began transforming into a war machine. But in those early weeks, it felt unstoppable. German soldiers believed victory would come before winter. Many carried summer uniforms only. Some even packed parade dress for a future triumph in Moscow. The confidence was overwhelming. The momentum undeniable. Yet beneath the speed, cracks were forming. Supply lines stretched thinner each day. Fuel consumption soared. Roads turned to dust under endless convoys. Distances in the Soviet Union were not European distances. They were vast, endless, devouring. Still, by midsummer 1941, it appeared nothing could halt the German advance. The Red Army had suffered catastrophic losses. Millions would soon be dead, wounded, or captured. The invasion had become the largest battlefield in human history. But wars are not decided in the first weeks. And the deeper Germany pushed into Soviet territory, the more the land itself began to fight back. Soon, the speed of Blitzkrieg would slow. The resistance would harden. And the road to Moscow would become something far darker than anyone in Berlin had imagined. Because Operation Barbarossa was not just an invasion. It was the opening of a war that would consume both conqueror and defender alike. And winter was coming. This was never meant to be a conventional war. It was designed to be something far worse. When German soldiers crossed into Soviet territory, they were not just carrying rifles and ammunition. They were carrying ideology. Orders had already been issued. Before the invasion began, political commissars were to be executed immediately. No trials. No prisoners. The war in the East would not follow international law. It would not follow European tradition. It would not follow humanity. It would be a war of annihilation. Behind the advancing Wehrmacht came special units, mobile killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen. Their mission was not military victory. It was extermination. They targeted Jewish communities, communist officials, intellectuals, anyone considered an enemy of the Reich. In towns across Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, and Belarus, men, women, and children were gathered, forced to dig pits, and shot. Entire communities disappeared in a single afternoon. The front lines moved forward. The graves stayed behind. German soldiers wrote home describing vast landscapes and rapid victories. But other letters spoke of something darker. Executions, burned villages, bodies lining the roads. This war was fueled by racial hatred, the belief that Slavic lands were meant to be conquered, that their people were expendable. Food was seized from occupied regions, supplies redirected to Germany. Civilians left to starve. The hunger plan had been drafted before the invasion. Millions were considered disposable. Cities began to feel the consequences. In Leningrad, encirclement loomed. In Ukraine, mass shootings escalated. In Belarus, villages were erased from maps. And yet, despite the scale of destruction, the Soviet Union did not collapse. Instead, something unexpected began to form: resistance. Scorched earth policies were enacted. Retreating Soviet forces destroyed railways, bridges, crops, anything that might benefit the invader. Factories were dismantled piece by piece, loaded onto trains, transported thousands of miles east. Entire industrial cities were reborn beyond the Ural Mountains. It was chaotic, desperate, but it was survival. German planners had expected a campaign lasting months. They had not prepared for a drawn-out war of attrition, and the deeper they advanced, the more brutal the fighting became. In Smolensk, resistance stiffened. Counterattacks erupted. The Red Army, though battered, was not broken. German commanders began to realize something unsettling. The Soviet Union had depth, endless reserves of land, endless manpower. For every division destroyed, another seemed to appear. Losses mounted on both sides. Captured Soviet soldiers were held in open fields, starving, exposed. Thousands dying without shelter. The scale of human suffering expanded beyond comprehension. This was no longer a lightning campaign. It was becoming a war that consumed everything it touched. And still, Hitler believed victory was near. He underestimated the will of a nation fighting for survival. He underestimated distance. He underestimated winter. But most of all, he underestimated what happens when a war is built not only on strategy, but on hatred. Because hatred burns fast. And what burns fast often burns out. As summer turned to autumn in 1941, the advance slowed. The resistance hardened. The illusion of an easy victory began to crack. Ahead lay Moscow, the symbolic heart of the Soviet Union. If it felt, the war might end. If it held, everything would change. Operation Barbarossa had unleashed unimaginable destruction. But it had not yet achieved its goal. And time was no longer on Germany's side. By October 1941, Moscow was within reach. German commanders could see the final objective. The symbolic heart of the Soviet Union. The capital, the prize that would break the enemy's spine. Operation Typhoon began. A final massive push toward Moscow. Panzer divisions advanced once more. Encirclements formed at Vyazma and Bryansk. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were captured again. It looked like the end. In Moscow, panic spread. Government ministries prepared evacuation plans. Foreign embassies burned documents. Civilians dug trenches in frozen soil. Trains carried factories east. Statues were covered. Art was hidden. For a moment, it seemed the capital would fall. But something was changing. The weather turned first. Autumn rains arrived. The roads dissolved. The Russian Rasputitsa. Mud swallowed trucks. Mud swallowed tanks. Mud swallowed horses. Engines overheated. Supply lines choked. Fuel failed to arrive on time. German soldiers who had advanced hundreds of miles now moved at walking speed. Then came November. The temperature dropped. 10 degrees below freezing. Then 20. Then 30. German troops had not been equipped for this. Summer uniforms. Thin gloves. Oil that froze inside engine blocks. Weapons that jammed in the cold. Frostbite spread faster than bullets. Meanwhile, Soviet reinforcements arrived. Fresh divisions from Siberia. Trained for winter warfare. Properly equipped. Accustomed to brutal cold. Stalin had gambled. Intelligence suggested Japan would not attack from the east. It transferred entire armies westward, and they arrived at the edge of Moscow just in time. On December 5, 1941, the Red Army counterattacked. Through snowstorms, through frozen forests. Ski troops emerged from white horizons. Artillery thundered in sub-zero air. German soldiers, exhausted and undersupplied, were forced backward for the first time. For months, they had only advanced. Now, they retreated. It was not a collapse, but it was a crack. The myth of invincibility shattered in the snow outside Moscow. Hitler reacted with fury. He forbade retreat, issued stand-fast orders. Commanders who suggested withdrawal were dismissed. The war shifted from maneuver to survival. German troops dug into frozen ground, improvised winter defenses, burned furniture for warmth. For the first time since 1939, Germany had been stopped. Moscow did not fall. The Soviet Union did not collapse. Instead, the war transformed. What had been intended as a rapid campaign of annihilation was becoming a prolonged conflict of endurance. And endurance favored the nation with deeper reserves, greater space, greater manpower. The road to Moscow had revealed a brutal truth. Blitzkrieg had limits. Ideology had limits. Confidence had limits. But winter had none. By early 1942, Operation Barbarossa had failed to achieve its primary objective. The Soviet Union still stood. Its capital remained in its hands. Its factories were producing weapons beyond the Urals. Its army, though battered, was rebuilding. The German army had won enormous territory, inflicted catastrophic losses, but it had not delivered the knockout blow. And in war, failure to win quickly can be fatal. The invasion that was supposed to last months would now stretch into years. Ahead lay Stalingrad, Kursk, Leningrad under siege, and eventually, the long road back to Berlin. The first crack had appeared outside Moscow, and once a crack forms, it spreads. Operation Barbarossa did not end in a single day. It did not collapse in one dramatic moment. It bled out. When German forces failed to take Moscow in the winter of 1941, something irreversible had happened. The illusion of a short war was gone. What was meant to be a lightning strike had become a war of endurance. And Germany was not built for endurance on this scale. The Soviet Union had survived the initial storm. Beyond the Ural Mountains, factories roared to life. Entire industries relocated east now produced tanks, aircraft, artillery, day and night. New divisions formed. New commanders rose. The Red Army adapted. It hardened. Meanwhile, German forces paid a price they had not anticipated. Men who believed they would march home by Christmas now faced another frozen dawn in endless fields. Supply lines stretched across hostile land. Fuel ran short. Equipment deteriorated. Confidence faded. The war had changed. In the north, Leningrad endured starvation under siege. In the south, the next great gamble would ignite at Stalingrad. In the center, Moscow stood, battered but unbroken. Barbarossa had been designed to destroy the Soviet Union in months. Instead, it awakened its full power. Hitler had underestimated geography. He had underestimated climate. He had underestimated resilience. But most of all, he had underestimated time. Every passing month strengthened the Red Army. Every delay drained German resources. Every mile gained required blood to hold. The largest invasion in human history had failed to deliver its decisive blow. Over 3 million Axis soldiers had crossed the border in June 1941. Thousands of tanks. Thousands of aircraft. A front stretching nearly 2,000 miles. And yet, the Soviet Union still stood. From that moment forward, the Eastern Front would consume the majority of German military strength. It would become the decisive theater of the Second World War. What began on a quiet summer morning would end 4 years later in the ruins of Berlin. The road to the Reichstag started with Barbarossa. It was the moment Germany overreached. The moment ambition collided with distance. The moment ideology met reality. And once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. Millions would die. Cities would burn. Armies would disappear. But the first fracture, the first irreversible crack, appeared in the snow outside Moscow. Operation Barbarossa was not merely a failed invasion. It was the beginning of the end. Because in attempting to conquer the East, Germany guaranteed a war it could never truly win. History would remember June 22, 1941. Not only as the largest invasion ever launched, but as the moment the tide quietly began to shift. War had begun in silence, and it would end in ruins. If this story moved you, if you believe history should be remembered not just as dates and maps, but as human echoes across time, like this video, share it, and subscribe to Echoes of War, because the past still speaks. And here, we listen.